Welcome to the Parking Lot Powers podcast, where we lift the hood on the powers, politics, privileges, and the prickly aspects of private school life. If you've ever dropped off your child at school, you'll know that the parking lot is where connections are sparked, friendships kindled, and playdates conspired. Welcome to another episode of the Parking Lot Powers, where we delve into the prickly, the powers, the politics, and the privileges within our private school life. My name is Nentantla, and I am a mom of three, and literally we come together here because I'd like to be able to discuss all the things that I want to be able to discuss in that parking lot, and we don't simply get the chance to sometimes. And so today I want to be able to chat to you about what we call the PTA. And that is the Parent and Teachers Association. It's basically the community that is representative of the school, as well as the parents, to be able to bring the parents' insights, concerns, and whatever it is that the parent community can be able to infiltrate into the school to make it a much more holistic and a robust community that serves our children. And so, in my experience, the parent representation has been made up of the parent representatives, which are typically called class moms. And so, yes, we can be able to use a term that we can consider to be a much more gender neutral and actually say class representatives, but we all know that it's usually the moms that are in the forefront in these community affairs. And so, what does the PTA do versus what we would actually deem it what it's supposed to do? So I think I've shared this with you. If you've actually been a member for a relatively young tenure in this podcast, is that we've got young kids, and so our eldest right now is in grade 5. So I then decided, having observed how previous class moms operate, and this was like from the age when he was 5, when he basically joined another private school within the area. And then when he was in grade 1, I just thought, oh, let me put up my hand and say, I am going to be class mom. Oh. And lo and behold, I chose the year of reckoning. And what do I mean by that? It was the year that COVID basically happened, and everything that I had observed over the years basically went out the window. And so everybody was improvising, everybody was thinking on their feet in terms of how to be able to support communities, how the schools would continue to be able to operate and provide a service of education. And also then the issues that we were bringing forward or engaging with as parents within the PTA in this instance were new. It was just uncharted territory for all of us. And it was quite interesting to be able to just observe the dynamics in terms of how we were engaging as parents, me formally as a member of the PTA in our son's school, and also then having a daughter that was in another school and just being an ordinary parent there. And so because I was now in kind of another privileged position within the PTA, within our son's school, it then gave me insight that I was like, oh, okay, this is also what I can be able to expect as a parent now, let's say in the capacity of my daughter's school. And I found that for me, how I view this organizational framework of called the PTA, and I think I'm going to use a term that in these circles may not be popular, but I see it as a union. It is there to be able to represent the
the concerns, the interests of the parents, and some of those may not be popular. And so it is about making sure that that voice that we bring in is not necessarily our own. It's not steeped in a position of privilege because we are part of this small group of moms largely. And I'll tell you something, this was in 2020, and when I was a class rep in that, I just literally volunteered. I had no idea that when I put up my hand to be class mom, that I was going to be part of this much more formal forum called the PTA. Because in all the previous instances that I had observed other moms being class reps, at no point in time did they say it's part of the PTA and we're having meetings. We can bring in what your issues are, whatever your concerns are, what you think is going well for that matter, and we can actually bring it to that much more formal forum. And so I just joined in thinking that I'm a good project manager and I can be able to do this. And yeah, as I said, lo and behold, it then introduced me to this formal structure. And so just going back to then my experience then is that I found that there is a kind of a fear factor that I observed. Largely, as I said, it was in 2020. It was all new for all of us. So the schools were also trying to come up with policies and also be able to, I suppose, come up with best practice in terms of how to engage with transparency as best as they could at that at that point in time. And that was certainly something that I was pushing. I was like, we need to be transparent in terms of what kind of financial support can we be able to provide as a schooling fraternity or community? What does community and belonging mean at a time of uncertainty? And when we're all facing uncertainty, I'm talking about like as families, as parents having to be able to take on the primary role of being educators now, as well as also the schools having to just contend to what does sustainability mean for them in this new realm of reality. And as I said, I found that there was this kind of unexpressed fear within parents to be able to just say that, hey, this is not the, let's say in this instance, contract that I signed up for. And I'll speak specifically with our younger one. At the time, I think she was in grade 00. And the school basically said, no, they were too young at that point in time to be able to be engaged in online learning. They were basically providing about 30 minutes of time or interface time with the teachers through Zoom or whatever platform it was. And we were pushing back as some of the parents to say, this is not what we signed up for. I am the one that is now having to facilitate the learning of this child. And I've also got other responsibilities, not only in having other kids to be able to teach, but also having to also, those of us that have jobs, what does it actually mean? And if you then consider that the contact time was just 30 minutes versus half a day that we had to contractually agree to for them to be able to survive, for them to be able to provide an educational service, it was like, okay, how can we come together to be able to have this conversation? And I found that at that time, the schools weren't really ready to be able to have that conversation. I suppose they didn't know how to. So it was like, this is the contract, you on it to be able to pay the fees. Please make sure that you actually pay the fees. And when I was trying to then have the conversation with the other parents, they were concerned, but there was seemingly a fear, that's what I would categorize it as, of actually then being bold in saying that no, this is not what we signed up for. And so, how do we renegotiate the terms? How do we renegotiate the contract given that we are, in a sense, like a force majeure, even though they weren't actually calling it that because they still wanted to say that we are providing a service. And in with the parents that I was like, okay, what are then your concerns? Are you willing to actually express them? There was this reticence, and I was surprised at that, and yeah, I can may deem it reticence, fear, but there was always this kind of an underground movement or a resistance of just dissatisfaction and frustration, especially for the friends who had kids in boarding school, because oh, that one was actually a painful one because they still had to pay for boarding fees even though their kids were at home. And so there was a lot of frustration, and it felt as though parents were disempowered. And at the back of that, I was like, oh, okay, let me then develop a survey, put it out into like with my friends, all sorts of other community access that I had, and I just put together a survey, and I was like, guys, in your opinion, what is the objective of a PTA? And it was a very, very interesting for me. The findings were interesting because the majority, and I'm talking about 60% of the respondents actually said that the objective of the PTA is fundraising. And that is not how I had deemed it to be. And I think it also then for me, having just like sat with those results for quite some time now, because I did this survey during COVID, I just thought, excuse me, it is an opportunity for PTAs to be able to just reconsider if indeed their objective or their value proposition is indeed fundraising for the school. Is that talking to what is in the best interest of the parents? And yes, I will acknowledge that the financial sustainability of a school is of primary concern across the board. We all want to be able to know that we are investing in schools that are going to be there for the long haul. There were, I think, 1 or 2 schools that actually had to close down during COVID, but that also then spoke to that they did not have financial security, even leading up to that in terms of best practice, seemingly. I use that term with caution. And so I do recognize and acknowledge that financial stability and sustainability is a concern. But going back to the PTA, it is about, can we really deem that that is the primary objective that we are perceived to offer to the parent community? So I can tell you that for me, I think it is far broader than that. It is about, let's say, community and belonging. It is, that term has been bandied about so much in the last, I think, 3-4 years since. I mean, for me, it actually came to light during COVID, because that was when it's like, we are community. We need to all be able to make sure we'll fulfill our respective commitments to be able to make sure that we are still a community. And I was asking myself, okay, what does this really mean that we are a community when we are all facing some form of insecurity? And that, from a schooling point of view, is being banded in a way that says that make sure that you pay up your fees. So that for me was actually quite interesting. And of course, since then, there's been also a proliferation of policies that the schools, and I'm talking about this is just from my experience, schools trying to be much more inclusive. And so that has meant that in the two schools that I'm involved in, a revision of even policies such as hair policies. And it's really been interesting to be able to see that the schools want to be able to have the conversation. They see the need to be able to review these policies, such as the hair policies, but there's contention around what does that really mean. And for me personally, it's like, yes, we need to be neat and presentable, but ultimately, it's like, how fundamental is hair, like hair color, and all of those nuances that are included in these hair policies? How are they really critical to making sure that our kids are future fit, our kids are resilient, they are anti-fragile, we talk about being future fit, like how we making sure, and when I say we, I'm talking about the schools as well as the parent community, making sure that they are prepared for the future that is unfolding each and every day. It's not like in like 10, 15 years time, the future is unfolding in front of us. We can talk about AI and all of those things. And I do feel, for me, those are the things that schools need to really be prioritizing. The rate of technology, it is unfolding and progressing at a rate that we can't even fathom. We are struggling with it. Certainly, education is the one sector that is really being shaken up by the rate of technology. And so for me, I'm like, it's all good and well that we're talking about the day-to-day things, but and yeah, we've spoken about hair policies. We've spoken about like which technology devices do we have at school. Fundraising is a huge thing, but I do personally believe that there are bigger things that we need to be able to take on. And if we are not going to be in a position to really reckon with what community and belonging means in just like the mundane things that we're still kind of negotiating it, sometimes I actually feel like we are then not ready for what a AI represents from an opportunity point of view, but also from a threat point of view. People can be able to, their voices can be cloned, videos can be able to be developed that can misrepresent somebody entirely and damage people's futures. And I do feel that then, for me personally, PTAs need to be a bit more strategic and progressive in what they bring to the table. And so I do believe that we need to be able to just, I don't know, re-examine. And I do think when I consider what the survey brought forward, and it revealed that fundraising is what the community believe to be the primary objective of the schools, that for me is like ding ding ding. We need to actually pay attention to this, because it may be a red flag. Unless for a particular school, fundraising is then what the PTA deems itself to be their primary objective, and then they need to actually communicate what that is. So I do want to be able to invite the conversation, invite you into this conversation, and have a sense of what's been your experience with the PTA. Is it inclusive? Do you know when they're having a meeting? Do you have a sense of them having a sense of what their priorities are in a given year? Is it inclusive? How do you define inclusivity? If we're going to talk about community and belonging, we also then need to be able to talk about who are the gatekeepers of that, because some of these schools have been around for over hundreds of years, and I don't really think that there was a focus on community and belonging, and so something has thrust that forward. And so in us actually then bringing it forward, we are then having to contend with what does it mean, and so what has it meant in the past, and when we talk about it, what does it mean going into the future, and are there gatekeepers to community and belonging, and what does that look like for schools to be able to realize a future that is inclusive, that prepares our children for the future. And I'll say this, so for me, I do see that private schools are in such a privileged position that, and what do I mean by that? We're privileged because if you are in this class of society, upper class and whatever else is beyond that, we then know that that is the only class of society that is diverse in its representation. It's diverse in terms of representation of faith, race, to some extent very limited also in a way class, because these schools also offer scholarships to students that come from communities that are less privileged. So they want to be able to give opportunities to children that come from disadvantaged communities or less resourced communities that demonstrate some form of talent. And so we are a milieu that is representative of the diversity that we want to be able to see in the world, but we don't see in everyday life. So it's the only kind of opportunity for our children to be able to befriend each other across these kind of divisions of society that we see everywhere. In no other class are you going to see or have the opportunity of kids being able to befriend each other across different racial demographics, different even, let's say, gender gender representative parents, if I can say that, like whether it's like two mom parent household or two dad parent household. We're not going to see that, whatever the correct term is. The words actually escape me now. But we don't, in other classes, we don't actually see that kind of plethora of representation. And so we have that opportunity to be able to groom our kids to be able to be curious, be able to lean in to members of this community that may be so different from us. But I'm just like wondering whether does that really take place, because from what I've seen, ultimately there is that opportunity, but is that realized? Well, I do not believe so, because I do see that there's still an organization of friendships that is clustered according to, let's say, faith-based groups, whether in this case, let's say, Muslim community, whether it is like, let's say, predominantly white families, predominantly like maybe kind of wealthier families. And these may be contentious terms for me to even put out there. It's open for debate, and that's why I'm actually just inviting you to be able to say if that indeed is the case or not. What have you done differently to be able to say, okay, I'm going to actually buck the trend, I'm going to lean in to the diversity that this community actually offers, and that what have I done that is uncomfortable in my normal kind of social setting. But be that as it may, I'm going to round off by going back to saying that this is all what the school actually offers, but predominantly we're going back to the PTA being the forefront kind of organization that represents us as parents, and therefore there's also the teachers that represent the school, administration and vision and strategy, and what has been the best practice in your case. Have you seen the PTA being able to take forward what your issues are as a parent, do you see an accountability of the finances that the PTA raises? Do you see them being the custodians of community and belonging? And how do you even define community and belonging for you? Is the school progressive? Do you believe that the PTA is driving an agenda that is really preparing our kids, your kids in this instance, your kids, our kids, they're all our kids, that prepares them for a future that they can be meaningfully contributing members of society? And I do think that it's important that, for me personally, in any case, that ultimately our kids, we are investing in their education. Hefty investment, by the way. We're investing in it so that they can be not only contributing members of society, but also to be contributing members within our own families, right? And so what does that look like? Yeah, I've shared a bit of what my experience is within the PTAs. I've touched on that it may not have necessarily been one that I think is courageous and bold in its representation, but that may have been COVID, which was special. I know that since COVID there's been a drive to be able to make sure that we build community because of the divisions that COVID actually fostered. But how is that coming about? Do you believe it is then having reckoned with so much uncertainty? Are our schools, driving a strategic agenda that can be able to foster that? And is the way that PTAs have been traditionally constituted, is it in line with what we want to be able to see for the future? And I mean, I must say that one of the things that I want to be able to also touch on is that it's this almost like an over-representation of moms. And our son, he goes to a junior, it's a prep school for boys. And I've been quite curious about, because there's an over-representation of moms, even when it comes to issues such as rugby, for instance, they're the ones that are leading with the conversation in terms of the policy. If the school recently actually said that all boys need to play rugby, all of them. And there was a protest in certain sections or sects, in terms of certain mothers saying that I don't want my son to be able to play rugby. And that's all good and well. And it's perfectly fine for us to be able to have that voice. But I also do think that it's important to be able to have the voice of fathers in that room, because I do believe that rugby still has a role to play. However, it's almost as if when we are in our capacities or as roles as mothers, we then don't see the connection between that and them and all the positive spin-offs of being part of a team, part of something bigger than just your individual self. So with that, there's lots that we've touched on, I know that, but I just want to be able to just say, what's been your experience? Do you think it's serving you in a way that is preparing not our sons, our kids for the future? And do you think that we can be able to just review how PTAs are actually structured to be much more progressive? And what does that look like? All right, thank you.